Good morning, everybody. Happy Saturday. Happy Memorial Day weekend. I'm Joe Cook. That's Ian Boyd. That's Pack. We're here to talk a little Red River Shootout. Make sure you go to InsideTexas.com, use that promo code at the top of our description, or you can also use this QR code right here. $1 gets you 3 months. It gets you all the way up to the start of the season. Can't wait to see everybody over there as we discuss a lot of the most important schematic things about Texas 2026 season. Pack, one of the most important schematic things about Texas 2026 season is always, in every season essentially, is always how the Longhorns match up with the Sooners. We'll start with Brent Venable's defense and some of the studies you did on what the boys in Crimson and Cream have been doing over the past couple of years. Overall, what were some of your big takeaways, and what are some things Texas fans should know, especially as Arch Manning tries to maybe have a little bit better game than he did last year against Oklahoma in the Cotton Bowl?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that you have to know when we're talking about Oklahoma is just how much they do from a schematic standpoint. You generally, especially right now, if you listen to anyone at the NFL level, if you listen to more and more people at the college level, the number one thing you'll hear a lot of defensive coordinators say is they're trying to simplify. And the reason why you simplify is because you want your players to play fast, right? The more you ask them to do, the more likely they have to think, and you want to reduce the amount of thinking that you do on a football field, especially defensively where you don't have any of the advantages, right? You don't get to dictate you really don't get to dictate anything. That's what the offense is doing. So anytime you can make that reaction time shorter, anytime it can be just go out there and play as a defense, you typically want to do that. And that's what you see at the NFL level with a lot of the McDonald guys, a lot of those Baltimore defenses. They're pretty simple from a schematic standpoint. They're not doing a whole lot, especially on first and second down. It's a lot of two high shells, a lot of quarters. They'll spin down to some cover three, but really they're running like 10 coverages. They're not doing a ton of stuff. And at the college level, you're seeing more and more of that, right? Some of the best defenses in the country, if we're talking about Ohio State, they were incredibly simple. They were going to play cover three and they were going to play cover one, and they were going to sprinkle in some Tampa at times. But for the most part, it was just, we're going to play football and that's going to be it. And you can do that when you've got great players. And that's what makes Oklahoma so interesting, because they do not do that. They're going to run pretty much everything. And that's part of what makes Venables so hard to prepare for, is because you watch him one week and then you watch him the other week, and it's like you're watching two completely different defenses. So some of the way that you game plan for a team like that has to change, because you're not really game planning based off of what they did last week. You kind of have to do a little bit of self-scouting where you need to know, how are we going to get attacked? And if we know how we're going to get attacked, how do we then counter off of that? Because that's a lot of what ends up happening against Oklahoma. And in some ways, you can kind of see that show itself when Texas plays Oklahoma, where those first 20 to 25 snaps, Texas doesn't really get going, right? It's a lot of 3-and-outs. It's a lot of getting behind the chains. And then as the game goes on, you can kind of see Texas and Sark and the quarterbacks get more comfortable with what they're seeing. You can start to see them figure some things out. And from there, you can start to see the offense really start to take off. 2023 is a great example of this, right? The first, I think, 3 possessions were an interception, a punt, and then it might have been another interception. And then after that, they score 31 points. 2024, similar thing. The interception on the first possession, and then they end up scoring, I think it was 34 points again. And then this past year, I think it might have been 3 points at halftime. Second half, you score 13, and it could have been more, especially when you think about some of the possessions where they just ran the ball and then they punted, just playing game control. So there's kind of that element of, well, when you're playing Venables, you kind of got to know, okay, we're going to have to do a really good job of scouting because of just how much they do. And we can get into a little bit of, what do they do? What are they living off of? How are they doing that? But that's kind of the basic idea. Is he kind of bucks the trend of you need to be simple to be great. And he's a little bit more of like the Saban guys, where even like Georgia has become a lot more simple in recent years, where they've cut out a lot of the package. But if you were to go look at Nick Saban himself and his DCs, whether it was at Alabama or now Pete Golding, those guys run a ton of stuff. And that they're kind of in their own kind of category versus the rest of college football. And so that's a really interesting thing to see, is just how they manage to run as much as they do.
Pat, can you tell me? You tell me if this is the right time to get into this or not. But you mentioned that 2023 game.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, one of the standout things in that game was it felt like a return to the aughts in the Red River Shootout when they had to face Venables in that previous decade, where there were certain plays Texas ran that it felt like OU was like reading their mail. And that's been kind of a common trait for his defenses, Venables, especially against Texas. So I have like a two-part question here.
Mm-hmm.
One, how is he able to teach his players to jump tendencies so well while also teaching such a wide breadth of scheme and playbook? And then second, do you have theories on what makes them so good at picking on Texas's tendencies in particular?
Yeah, so to answer the first part, what makes him, I think one, especially in 23 and before the helmet comms came in, Venables is awesome at stealing signs. And I don't mean in like the Michigan way where it's you have someone going to games early, but they do a really good job of they have an entire team in their analysts that will just look at a team's signs. They'll use the TV copy, they'll use the coach's copy of the wide shot and the tight shot. And so what they're doing is they're just waiting and they're trying to grab your signs. And you could really see this with how late they get calls in, right? Venables is often staring over there. You'll see them get late calls. And so that's one of the things that they do really well is they're really, really committed to grabbing your signs, because Venables is one of those guys who wants to have the chalk last. He wants to be able to be in the right call at all times, a little bit like Sarkisian does. So that's one of the things that they do really well. And then to understand tendencies, they just have a really good analyst department. Their defensive analysts do an awesome job of understanding formationally what you're trying to do. They simplify it really well in terms of, in general, you really want to pare it down as much as possible, because teams are going to run a ton of different stuff. Offenses run, 20 different formations. They run 50 different plays. You get so much stuff throughout the season of what they're going to run. And so you kind of want to pare it down. And I think that's what they do really well is they pare down what you're going to do to, here are your 8 main concepts. Here's your 8 main formations. Here's what you're going to do out of those formations. Here's based off of this motion, right? If you're using a cross motion where you're starting the H on the left-hand side, you motion them to the right-hand side. Here's the 3 different things that they do. And so what they do is they take this really wide branch of what you do and they kind of parse it down into, about 10 calls. And what that allows you to do is, because offenses aren't running, you can't run a different play on all 60 snaps. That's way too much offense to install in a week. And so when you simplify down to about 10 concepts, you really allow yourself to have a good idea on, 25 to 40% of snaps on what you're going to get. And that's really all you need, because on the other 60, you have to imagine you're going to have about 20 of those being second and longs, third and mediums, stuff where you get into exotics and you can start to get into, here's how we're going to dictate protections. Here's what we're going to do from a coverage standpoint, because we know we're going to get these pass concepts. So they do a great job of understanding what are your base concepts, how do we take those away, so that way we can get you into our different exotic calls. And then in terms of the teaching, I think one of the things that really helps is they run their technique is almost the same in every single one of these coverages. So as an example, they have the eyes or hot coverage, which is 3 deep, 2 under. They've got cover 3, and then they've got quarters. In all 3 of those coverages, they'll play out of a half turn with their corners. So they'll start their corners facing the receiver, and then they'll bail them out so that way their shoulder is pointed to the receiver, so that way they can see the quarterback, and then they'll shuffle step out. So what they're doing is they're figuring out a way to simplify it for the players. Because when a technique is the same for a player, it doesn't matter what the call is. Because if it's the same across 4 calls, it's basically the same thing to them. You're not teaching them anything new. And so that's one of the things that they do is they'll keep technique consistent, because the more technique that you have, the more teaching that has to occur. When the technique is the same, the coverage is basically the same for the DBs. They're not learning anything new. All you're doing is you're changing up what you're doing from a front six standpoint at that point. And so that's what they'll do is you can install a lot of defense when you're not really installing a lot of defense. You're not installing different techniques. You're just creating new calls with the same technique. So that's one of the things that they do is they create a lot of continuity between concepts. And then the other thing is what they're really, really good about is with their DBs in particular, I think they do a really good job of stressing just playing with instincts. Because you'll see a lot of times on tape where they're in one specific call, but then they'll do something that's completely outside of the norms of what that coverage would be. Like a quarter safety, right? He's supposed to key 2, and if we're talking about 4 open sets, we'll say 2 to the field. For a quarter safety, your inside leverage, your eyes are supposed to start on 2. If 2's up and out, you got him. What you'll see OU do a lot is it's playing off the quarterback. So they'll see the snap, they'll get their ball key, right? So they're reading end man on the line of scrimmage. If it's a run key, which means a low hat, right? Your hips start to sink as an offensive lineman. Then they'll trigger, which is fine. That's a normal thing. But you'll see them a lot of times on pass, they'll just read the quarterback's eyes. And what that allows them to do is when you play off of instincts and you don't have to play within these superset rules, again, you can run more and more stuff because it's not like you need to memorize what we're doing. And so when you do a really good job of stressing the same eye control, stressing the same technique, you can kind of be more expansive.
You got into basically they run, like you said, Venables is able to go over a lot of different things and execute a lot of different things, especially from a coverage standpoint. We've seen him do the flyover, so the 3 down, the odd front with a 0 tech nose tackle. We've seen him do 4 down stuff when it comes to some of the decisions that he makes when it's time to play Texas, especially thinking of some of the personnel he's had in years past, like R. Mason Thomas, like David Stone that he still has. What do you expect to see maybe from a front perspective from Oklahoma on defense?
Yeah, so in 25, it was a little bit different than if you watch 24 and 23, because in 25 they ran a lot more heads fronts, which is double 2 techniques. So if we're talking about a head up nose on the center, now you just think about a head up tackle on the guard and then a head up nose on the other guard. So they ran that a lot. And one of the interesting things was how much heads that they ran against Texas. And part of it, I think, comes from the fact that the week prior, Texas had played Florida, and Florida used a lot of heads. Florida used a lot of 4 down split safety. And you could tell some of what Florida did had influenced Venables, where they ran a lot of mint as well, and some of it, Venables is one of the more front-based coaches in terms of how he deals with problems. So one of the things that gets stressed when you run a min front is the fact that away from the jack, there's a really soft end, right? Because that's a 4-eye. There's no edge support out there. And so one of the things that they do whenever the Y is in the core is they'll bump out the 4-eye away from the Y to be a 3 technique. They'll put the nose to the side of the Y in a shade, and they'll keep the 4-eye. And what that does is when you go from an inside shade to an outside shade, you now go from a react attack to an attack react player. So when you're a 4-eye, it's mirror the tackle. So if the tackle steps to you, you step to him, you engage the block. When you're an attack react player, it's all about getting vertical. You're just trying to destroy the play. The same way that like Colin Simmons did against Vanderbilt when he had the forced fumble, where it's just go up and make the play. That's a little bit of what you're doing when you're in an outside shade. And so that's a lot of what they were trying to do against Texas was away from the Y, they were going to set the 3 technique, and they were going to try to cut the play off. And some of that stems from the fact of why Texas has a lot of success against outside zone, especially when they run outside zone to the Y, right? When you run outside zone to the Y and you've got a 3 technique away from it, what you're doing if you get vertical as a 3 technique to the backside of outside zone is you're creating a really wide cutback lane, but you're also taking yourself completely out of the play, right? Because if it's going to this side and I'm right here and I'm all the way up here, you can now see that there's this space here for you to cut back. That's the idea there behind why you don't want to have a 3 technique to the backside of outside zone. But they did that a lot against Texas, and that's where you saw some of the areas where they got gashed. So that's one of the things that kind of has led to them having problems and what they were doing from a front standpoint. They still ran standard 4 down over under stuff. A lot of it was more based around over setting the 3 technique to the Y or to the tight end. And some of that is just because when Texas is in pistol, they're not running a whole lot of power or counter. A lot of it's going to be outside zone, and a lot of it's going to be based off of split zone where they're going to bring the Y back, or they're going to try to run the zone lead play where the Y is going to block down on the end and they're going to try to run it to them. And in both cases, you want that 3 technique there because the whole idea when you're playing outside zone is you need to cut the play off. You can't continue to let it stretch, because the more it stretches, the more cutback lanes get opened, just based off of the way that it gets blocked, where it's a horizontal blocking scheme for the offensive lineman. And when you give the offensive line enough time to vertically move someone or to horizontally move someone, at some point there's going to be created a gap. And that's been a real problem for Oklahoma, where you need to cut that play off in one of 2 ways. Either your 3 technique needs to get vertical through the B gap and force it backside, or your linebackers have to plug. They need to the front side, they need to plug it or the ball gets cut off. You have to do one of the 2 things, and they haven't really done that. And that's been part of the reason why they've struggled so much against outside zone when Texas has played Oklahoma.
Before we keep going, got to show some love to our sponsor. That is Luxe Kitchen and Bath.
Are you ready to love your kitchen and bathroom again? Luxe Kitchen and Bath will bring that to life. Luxe has been offering high-end kitchen and bathroom remodels for 3 generations throughout the greater Austin area. With 5-star review after 5-star review on Google and Facebook and an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau, you can put your faith in Luxe Kitchen and Bath's award-winning designers and skilled craftspeople to bring your dream vision to life. But that's not all. Luxe's all-star team also provides full home remodels, large additions, and even commercial build-outs as well. So call Luxe Kitchen and Bath at 833-358-LUXE today, or visit luxekitchenbath.com to discover where quality meets luxury and begin the process of transforming your home. Get your free quote today by calling 833-358-LUXE. That's LUXE, or by visiting luxekitchenbath.com. Contact info is in the description.
Ian, when we think about this game and how Texas, under Sarkisian, who is the play caller for the Longhorns, 3-1 against Oklahoma. This little girl has never seen Texas lose in the Red River Shootout. There are obviously a lot of different things that go into that. Texas has put up points on those Brent Venables defenses, whether it has been a win or the one loss. But what are some of the common traits or maybe a running theme for Sarkisian? What is a running theme for Sarkisian against Venables that's allowed him to find enough success to put up 30, 40, almost 50 points in the Cotton Bowl?
Well, as Pac was explaining a minute ago, I think the vertical inclination of their defensive linemen is a big factor, because most teams in college football do not run outside zone, or if they do, they don't quite run it like Texas. I'll let Pac explain that in a second. And the stress that Texas has been able to consistently create, like even if you look back, the last couple of years have been really obvious that Texas is really hurting Oklahoma with outside zone. But if you go back to like even 2022 or 2023, you'll see plays where like you'll see outside zone plays in 2023 where Jonathan Brooks got loose on Oklahoma and they really kind of ran through them a lot on that. But Pac, why is it that Texas is so much better? Have you been able to nail this, distill this down? Why has Texas been so much better at running outside zone against Venables to exploit him than say like Missouri, who's also an outside zone team but got squashed?
Yeah, so in general, when you watch NFL and you watch the Shanahan tree, the number one concept you see is outside zone. And part of the way that the NFL runs outside zone is they run it like a true blocking scheme. So you as a offensive lineman, you actually need to make contact, reach, and then climb up. So the idea is similar to how inside zone you've got a track and you've got true footwork and it's an actual movement. That's how outside zone is for Texas. It's an actual run scheme. Whereas with a team like Missouri or a lot of teams that run outside zone, they're just cut blocking. So what they'll do is they'll take 2 steps and then they'll cut at the feet. So they'll dive at the knees, they'll dive at the shins of a defensive line. And so it's outside zone in the sense of you're trying to create cutbacks and it has some horizontal movement, but you're not creating a whole lot of displacement. And what you're really trying to do is you're trying to trade 1 for 1. You're not really trying to work up to the linebackers. You're not trying to do any of that stuff. You're just trying to create a cutback lane for your back, and then that's it. So the way that Texas runs it is a lot more like the NFL. And because it's a lot more like the NFL, your linebackers now have to actually treat it like that, where it's an actual stretch play. And to any play that's being stretched out, you don't want to keep letting it stretch, because the more something stretches horizontally, there's going to be a gap somewhere. It's just kind of the way that works when you're asking a defensive line to hold the point of attack for 3 seconds. At some point, somebody's going to get reached and be forced to the backside. It's going to create a crease. So what Missouri does is they don't ask their offensive line to reach guys. They just say, we're going to cut block. So we're going to try to take out the knees of a defensive line. And when we do that, a gap's going to end up opening up because we took out a player. Well, the problem with that is if you can't cut block, if they do a good job of this, Oklahoma, if you're able to get off the cut block, if you're able to snatch off of it, well, now you've just got a defensive lineman that's in the backfield that's completely untouched. Whereas Texas, they make it a real emphasis to get hands on everyone. It's not about, can we cut block and then create one open gap? It's, can we create as many open gaps as possible to give our back the ability to pick which cutback lane he wants, or if he wants to keep working front side. So that's really the main idea, is when you cut block versus you actually block it up. When you actually block it up, you put more stress on the defense, because now defensive linemen have to be really, really good at the point of attack. They can't get reached. And that's a really hard thing against outside zone, because especially when you start to get into tighter splits with your defensive line, where you're maybe, about like 1 yard outside of, or 1 inch outside of the outside shade of a guard, there's almost no chance you're not going to get reached, because the defensive line is going to be later to react than the offensive line, because they're trying to react off the snap. The offensive line knows when it's coming, right? They have the cadence, they have the timing of it. They've repped it so many times. They know when the ball is going to get snapped. That allows them to get a better get off than the defensive line. And so when you're a half second late to react and I'm really close to you, I'm going to be able to get out in front of you. I'm going to be able to get to the play side faster than you're going to be able to. And so that's why it works so well, is when you get into these tighter splits as a defensive line, when you're trying to be reactive and when you're facing outside zone, you have a much higher likelihood of actually getting reached and then giving up a cutback lane or a lane to the front side.
This begs the question. Go ahead, Joe.
I was about to say, Michael Welch brings up why is outside zone unpopular, and I think Pat, you went into, it's something you have to major in, or if you want to be, an offense that's multifaceted, it's a thing you got to teach. But Ian, you wanted to bring this one up, and I'm curious maybe what your takeaway is from this question.
Well, just my guess is that Texas runs this more like the NFL and other teams don't, because to actually connect with people and reach block them consistently, you need athletes.
Yeah.
And so if you've got like 2-3 star dudes that you're already asking them to be a few different things, one of them is not going to be horizontally agile. Is that the summation of it?
Yeah, that's exactly what I would have said. Like when you run inside zone or duo, it's just about how strong you are, right? And you can develop that. That's all your strength and conditioning. It's fighting in a phone booth, and you can absolutely do that. When you're running outside zone, you got to be a great athlete. It's why like the NFL it's filled with incredible athletes. If you look at what those outside zone teams have, they've got incredibly nimble guards. And so, a lot of the times it's moving a tackle inside to guard. This is why the NFL is doing that so much right now is tackles are naturally going to move really well because when they're in their pass set, right, they've got to kick slide and they've got to create a lot of vertical movement because you can't give up the outside shoulder against a speed rush, right? That's kind of the idea there. So you get trained to be a really strong functional mover at tackle, and you end up getting moved inside. Well, now you've taken a really good athlete at tackle, moved him inside to guard. You're going to be able to still be able to run outside zone because you've got great athletes everywhere. There's not that in college because one, you're not going to find tremendous tackles in high school. A lot of that is projection, right? When you get a 5-star, there still is a certain level of we need to develop a lot of his movement skills because when you look at them in high school, they win a lot by just being physical freaks. They don't win with hand placement. They don't win with technique. They win by being 400 pounds. They win by being 400 pounds more than the guy across from them. Like they're facing someone who weighs 50 pounds and they're 350. It's like, you know what I mean? There's a certain level. We're just way bigger than you when you're 5-star. So that's kind of one of the things that occurs is you don't have these awesome athletes, especially not right away. And so you do really need to major in it because it is so much different than inside zone and duo and even gap scheme. Like counter is a lot more similar to inside zone and duo than it is something like outside zone.
I guess when we think about where Sark tries to find yardage, obviously he does the multifaceted run game, a lot of zone stuff, a lot of outside zone in recent years. But he's been able to find some RPO success, and Sarkisian's not like a spam RPO type coach, or at least he hasn't shown that to be quite yet. But he does have it in his repertoire. What are some of the things that Texas is able to do as far as like from the RPO approach that helps them put up some decent yardage and find success against Oklahoma?
Yeah, so one of the things that really helps with that is the fact that Texas is so multiple with what they do from a run game standpoint. You can really tell that Sarkisian worked in the NFL because really the main difference between when you're looking at college offenses and NFL offenses, besides the under center stuff and the lack of RPOs in the NFL, is just that the NFL runs so many different run schemes. If you were to watch a Shanahan team or if you watch Todd Monken, you'll see that they run outside zone, they run inside zone, they run trap, they run counter, they run power, they run duo, they run pretty much everything. And so Sarkisian is very similar to that, where you get a lot of different runs. And in general, RPOs are a lot easier when you're in outside zone or when you're in inside zone because you force those overhangs to fit a lot faster. Whereas with outside zone, if you're going to run outside zone away from the nickel, if that ball is going to cut back, the nickel is going to have a little bit more time because outside zone is not going to hit immediately. It's going to take about 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds where that nickel can be slow to play the RPO and then fit in late because in order to create those cutback lanes, you got to move laterally first. Whereas if you were to work vertically in inside zone, it's a bit faster, right? You can hit A gap immediately running inside zone or duo. You're not really trying to hit A gap with outside zone. You're really trying to hit B to C. That's kind of the aiming point, is you're really trying to cut back off of the inside leg of the tackle as a running back in outside zone. And so when you are able to have so many different run games, that does open up some of the RPO stuff. And then I think really when we're talking about outside zone, Texas got into more of this with Manning than they did with Ewers, but that's some of the under center stuff because that's really where the NFL makes a lot of that's where the Shanahan tree makes a lot of their bread and butter is outside zone and then the play action off of it with under center because you start to suck guys in, you get the over routes, you get the posts, you get the goes and all the different stuff that the NFL really, really likes to run out of under center play action.
So maybe before we wrap up, I got two last notes for you, Pack.
Mm-hmm.
Not related though.
Mhm.
One is that something I've noticed. I'm curious if you've seen this or seen how they do this, but I've noticed that Oklahoma routinely has game plans where they will play like true cover two or like a deep safety to one side over like maybe the number one place where you'd like to take a deep threat. And then elsewhere, they'll be like ultra aggressive. And so they just always seem to have this, they always seem to have someone back either to like eliminate the big play over the top that could really bust them or to like limit the damage if something goes wrong. And the one time that, well, it's actually been as bad as Sark has taken it to them in recent years. They have been able to force him to convert in the red zone a lot. Mm-hmm. And in both 23 and really 24, like Texas couldn't really do it.
Yeah, you do. You notice that a lot, especially on base down. So there's two things that they do. Ian, you're familiar with it, but the cheat technique with the middle field safety, where if you're familiar with, for anyone who doesn't know, so a lot of times they'll show too high, right? And so there's going to be a down safety when you're playing cover three, right? Because you're trying to get to 4 under 3 deep. So what the other safety is going to do is he's going to take 3 shuffle steps towards the middle of the field. And the reason you do that is because you don't want him bailing to the middle of the field if they're not going to throw the ball, right? If they're going to run the ball and you sprint out 30 yards down the field, you have zero chance of being involved in the run game. Like you're basically playing at that point 11 on 10 in the run game. Whereas if you keep your safety involved and you don't sprint him out, he can then get involved. So it fits a little bit more like you've got 7 guys in the run fit at all times. And that's a good thing, right? If we're talking about against 4 open sets, well, now if the safety is going to backpedal and he's just reading it, if it's a run, he can actually be involved. And that helps because, one, it can help limit some of the explosives in the run game where Texas has had a few of them, right? But it hasn't been like they've strung off 60-yarders, 40-yarders consistently. A lot of the time it's been a little bit more of 7, 8, 9, and then they'll hit 30, and then they'll hit 5, and then they'll hit 4, and then they'll hit 20. But
I think that depends on the back.
Yeah.
For Texas.
Some of that is definitely true. But then in the pass game, they do play a lot of too high. It's a lot of quarters. And with Texas, they're not one of these teams that's a true spread team, like a Kiffin, like a team like Heupel, where they're not really running a whole lot of 4-man route concepts where they're trying to spread you out and then run vertical routes with the 2 and then the 1. They're trying to play a little bit tighter. It's a little bit more like the NFL where they're going to have a tight end on the ball most of the time. They're going to have a slot receiver to the other side, but he's going to be inside the hash. And so most of the time when that happens, they're not all 4 receivers are going vertical. So it allows one of your safeties to be free, especially when you're in quarters. He can now double the deepest. And so you end up taking away the deepest route. It's a little bit of keep everything in front of you. And when you're able to keep everything in front of you, you can take away some of the passing game explosives. And when you play with your eyes on the quarterback like they do, well, now it's less about the route concepts because you can just read off of him. And it doesn't matter if you've got someone working out, if the quarterback's not looking out there. You kind of just want to play off of where he's looking. Because if he's looking towards, if you can tell that there's an over route coming from the other side, and that's where the quarterback wants to throw it, you can sit on that and take that away. So some of it is the vision approach behind how they play their quarter safeties, where it's less about route matches. It's a little bit more of like true zone coverage. That really helps with taking some away the passing game explosives. Some of the run game explosives in general, outside of against Texas, are because of the cheat safety that Oklahoma, Georgia, now Texas will use to help gain an extra hat in the run fit for free.
And I think a good place to end is we've seen Texas has been able to exploit Oklahoma the last few years, mostly on the outside zone angle. If you have another angle or you think Sark's been good at exploiting them, chime in. But Oklahoma, Brent Venables is not going to stick around if you can't beat Sark ever. And he, with like losing like 3 out of 4 now, right?
Mm-hmm.
What can he do to change his approach next year to not go down again?
Yeah, so it's a little interesting because in 25, if you were to watch Oklahoma in general, they're a lot more similar to a team like Georgia. And if you remember how Georgia played Texas, it was a lot of those ice pressures. They brought 6 a ton. They brought a lot of 5-man pressures. They were uber aggressive in terms of what they were doing from a pressure standpoint. And in general, that was a lot more similar to what Venables was in the first 5 games versus Illinois State, versus Temple, versus Michigan, versus Kent State, versus Auburn. They were really aggressive. They brought a lot of ice pressures. They brought a lot of 5-man pressures. And then you watch them against Texas, and it's not that. They brought 4-man a lot more. They brought an ice pressure once all game, and it was on a 3rd and 1 where they were trying to get a stop in the run game. So one, it kind of felt like Venables went away from what works. And part of that is, some of it's the difference in how Georgia plays their defensive line. Georgia's a react attack defense. So against those outside zone plays, they're not trying to create that vertical movement as much as they're just trying to build a wall and then let their linebackers plug. And when you do that, because they have such great athletes at linebacker, when you cut the play off, that backside linebacker can fill and fold off of the back. You take away a lot of the advantages that you want to get with outside zone. So that's one of the things that Georgia does really, really well is they don't try to get vertical displacement from their defensive line because they understand that we have the linebackers for that, and they're trying to be really gap sound. So that's one of the things is you kind of have to, if he wants to find more success against Texas, some of it's just a philosophical difference, and you've got to change the way you play your defensive line. You can't be as aggressive.
That feels like a tough.
Right.
Oh, it's going to be that.
Right. And so I was going to say, you probably don't do that because it works so well for you. And part of the reason why is because you don't see outside zone all that often on their schedule.
Yeah.
Right? They maybe see it once or twice a season. So to change your whole identity based off of that is a really hard thing to do, especially when you create so much success playing it the way you do, because they have a multiple of different ways to play their front with stunts that they use that has a lot of success in general. So they have to figure out I think they need to figure out a better way to play their 3-high structures, because one of the problems with how they're playing 3-high against Texas is they're using double buzz rotation with their safeties. And so what that does is now when you play double sky, what that means is both of your safeties from 3-high are going to become the curl flat players. When you're a curl flat player, you're a force player. And when you're a force player, all you're trying to do is force the ball back inside if it ever gets outside. Well, the problem when you play with buzz support is both of your linebackers who are both tucked in the box, they're now sky players because the buzz players are the safeties. So if you're your two linebackers, you're expanding out here. Well, now you're asking your 2 safeties to fit internal gaps. And so against these plays, that's really, really hard to do against outside zone when the play is already trying to go outside and you're in your linebacker. So if the play is trying to hit right here and I'm the linebacker and I've moved all the way out here, now you've created a natural seam between the linebacker and between the safety that's rolling down. And so the way that they've structured their 3-high, especially on base downs, isn't super conducive to stopping outside zone. It's fine against inside zone because you're going to end up running right towards the safety. When you're running outside zone and you're trying to stretch it out, and now you're pulling your linebacker out of the box, you're making your life really hard in terms of how you're fitting the run. So they've got to figure out they've got to change up how they want to play 3-high. I think they need to play it. The other thing is I think they need to start getting into more of the Tampa 3 high stuff where they play a lot of 3 deep zone out of 3 high. When you play Tampa, it's a lot easier because now you can get your corners to be aggressive in the fit. And that's a pretty good way of cutting the playoff against outside zone because, again, the whole thing with defending outside zone is just cut the playoff. If you cut the playoff most of the time, you're going to be fine. And you can cut the playoff with about anyone, but it's a lot easier to do with – it's a whole lot easier to do with a linebacker or a second-level player than a defensive lineman. So – play more Tampa, I would say, because when you look at a lot of teams that have played 3-high and have had success against Texas, a lot of it really is the 3-high. It really is the teams that specialize in Tampa out of 3-high. That's one of the things that you can do. You can experiment with. I think they need to be a little bit more aggressive as well.
Sark knows that because he opened a media day once with homage to Monty Kiffin, who had schooled him in lane. And he's like, if anybody out there is thinking about running Tampa 2 against us next year, please do, because I know that defense backwards and forwards, which may have just been like please don't run Tampa 2 against us.
And one of the things I hear when you go through that explanation, it's just what Sark's offense does. When you pair the outside zone with the, you can actually pass the ball, the downfield aspect of it. It is meant to put those linebackers not only in the 53 and a third yard conflict, but also the 100-yard conflict as well, and that's what makes Sark a pretty successful play caller. So, Ian, Pack, any final parting thoughts before we get out of here?
You good?
Ian,
Don't
lose this game. That's always the big one. I think y'all do a fantastic job of understanding where the chess pieces move, but y'all also know there's blood and there's thoughts in those chess pieces, and this is something that you have to learn, you have to understand, because if you lose this game, it's a big deal for those who are helping to pay your salary. So always a fun part of it, the X's and O's, the Jimmies and Joes, and then whatever people think about the actual game. Make sure you head over to InsideTexas.com. Use that first link in our description. Use that QR code that you see at the top left of your screen. Sign up for just $1. That'll get you 3 months of access. That'll get you insight all the way up until the very beginning of the season. Ian, Pack, thank you so much. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on the Inside Texas Football YouTube channel powered by InsideTexas.com.